Thanks, Adam, for the introduction. When I was trying to explain to my 3-year-old why it was that I wasn't going to be home for bath time and bedtime tonight, I started showing him some of the Williams Thinking talks from previous iterations. We were doing this yesterday. And after we watched a few of them, and by watch, I mean watch the sort of first 30 seconds before clicking on the next one, he asked me what my talk was about. And so I said, would you like me to rehearse it for you? And he said, sure. And so we sat down at the dining room table, and I began to rehearse it for him. And about a slide or 2 slides in, about 30 seconds in, he raised his hand. He's big on raising hands now in preschool. And I said, yes, Everett? And he said, Daddy, I don't think you should talk about this. And I said, really? He said, yeah, you should talk about something else. And I said, what else should I talk about? He said, you should talk about how there's a skunk under our shed and we need someone to trap it. Okay, go. I didn't take his advice. I am not speaking about the skunk under our shed. I hope that that doesn't offend you as much as it offended him and that you managed to enjoy this more than he did. We begin here, 21 miles north of a small city called Belle Fourche, along Old Highway 85 in Butte County, South Dakota. With the voice of New York Times columnist Dan Barry, who writes, and writes beautifully, the paper's popular This Land series. The mesmerizing prairie monotony along Highway 85 South is abruptly broken by a blue sign about the size of a cafeteria tray. In the roadside shorthand, it offers an expeditionary challenge worthy of Jules Verne. This way, 7.8 miles to the center of the nation. The unpaved road at the turnoff greets cars of the curious with growls of annoyance, and for several miles offers only sheared sheep, skittish antelope, and grass. But just when suspicions of a prank begin to invade the mind, something 100 yards off the road catches the eye. Something red and white and, yes, blue. It is a wind-tattered American flag, flapping at the top of a silvery pole that rises from the Dakota moonscape like the clean stake of some disoriented astronaut. A hand-scrawled sign propped against a barbed wire fence provides confirmation, though the absence of a souvenir stand or even a snow cone booth would suggest otherwise. This remote spot is, in fact, the declared geographic center of the United States. Over the years, this dot on the map has been treated as a holy place and as a place to share a six-pack. An inconvenient place, a nearly forgotten place, a place to reflect on something larger than oneself. Who knows why the center of things matter, the centers of cities, of states, of countries, but they do. As my thesis student Juliana would say, word. Centers do matter. In politics, in political life, and political culture, they matter a great deal, in fact, which is why my research, my teaching, my intellectual life as a scholar, really, is systematically in search of them, and why I think our civic lives as Americans should be perpetually in praise of them. I should distinguish at the outset between 2 senses of the word center, both of which are at play in Barry's article, and even more so in our colloquial usage of the term. On the one hand, there's center in the locational sense, as the midpoint of or balance between 2 or more things. In baseball, the center fielder stands in the middle of the outfield. In politics, candidates are described as either left, right, or purportedly smack dab between the two, center. On the other hand, there's center in the representational sense, as the core or heart of a single thing. The Williamstown Youth Center, currently on Cole Avenue, soon to be relocated next to Williamstown Elementary School, isn't equidistant from all points in town, so much as it aspires to be the chief gathering place for all the children and families of town. A man is said to have a moral center, not because his values literally sit between his desires and his conscience, but because he is grounded and rooted in something substantively significant. Center as midpoint, center as core. These 2 conceptions aren't mutually exclusive, but neither are they automatically overlapping. Nor do I believe they're equally desirable or equally important conceptions. In fact, even though we tend to valorize the former, think of how those in the political center are regarded as rational and sensible, while those on the left and right flanks are treated as extreme ideologues. I want to recommend that we actually devote our attention to and reserve our veneration for the latter. There's nothing intrinsically glorious about being in the middle, a bland and touristy observation that resides exclusively at the surface. But there is something admirable, something respectable, something deserving about being at the essence, the very invocation of which implies layers of civic texture and richness and depth. In Barry's article, for example, the importance of that spot in Butte County as the center of the nation isn't really because it sits at the nexus of lines drawn from Bar Harbor to Honolulu, Fairbanks to Key West. No, it's because it conjures something unquestionably, something purely, and something quintessentially American. In other words, it's less that Butte County serves as the balance for the nation than that it might well be the heart of it. As I try to show my students every semester, the heart of America, not the geographical, but the mythical center, has long captivated observers and thinkers, politicians and artists alike. Where is it? How do we find it? What do we do with it once we get there? Bigger names than I have contemplated these questions, each producing their own breathtaking works in pursuit of answers to them. Tocqueville, I confess that in America I saw more than America. Whitman, I hear America singing, the varied carols I hear. Mellencamp, okay, not quite as big as the other two. Ain't that America? Something to see, baby. Watch the news or read the paper and you see how this sort of serious, if implicit, concern with the center holds in contemporary politics. On the left, Occupy Wall Street thinks we've buried it under the weight of corporate wealth. On the right, the Tea Party thinks we've lost it in a maze of governmental regulation. In the center, well, I've actually got nothing here. I just couldn't resist the pun to try to keep you on your toes. The point is that whether it's liberty or lawfulness, religion or rebellion, the drive to find, the drive to define, the drive to recover and reify the center, the heart of the American experience, goes on every day and all around us. But ubiquitous as these drives, both literal and figurative may be, funny things happen on our journeys to the American center and on our quests for America's soul. We get lost. We get lazy. We lap up enough luxury to make us a little too lax about laying out the label we've longed to lend. Sorry, I just really like alliteration. After all, the center is hard to find, exhausting to reach, and frankly, not always the prettiest girl at the party. To reach the center Barry sought, you need to drive an extra 13 miles on the highway, then finagle your way under, over, or otherwise through a barbed wire fence. Then walk another 7.8 miles on a bumpy dirt path, only to find, well, absolutely nothing. With these requirements, is it any surprise that the center often feels more like the periphery? Is it any surprise, for example, that of the more than 2,200 visitors to Belle Fourche, South Dakota each month, fewer than 200 endeavor the trek to the real center? The rest choosing instead to pose for photos at a touristy monument before continuing on to Borglum's masterpiece, through the Black Hills and beyond. All too often, all too many of us do the same, sidestepping the true center in favor of a poser that doesn't take us out of our way, that doesn't get our hands dirty, that is, in some manner, easier on the eyes or the wallet, the stomach or the mind. We drive through the Chandelier Tree in Leggett, California, but we never actually roam the unspoilt majesty of the Lost Coast or consider the plight of a logging town in an increasingly anti-logging age. We stop at south of the border, along I-95 in the Carolinas, but we never actually see anything resembling a southern way of life, much less think about the life of Mexican immigrants in contemporary America. We gamble on Indians' land, but we never really venture onto their reservations, never see the depths and depravity of their poverty or the display and demonstrations of their pride. Whether seduced by mere convenience or duped by pernicious impostor, we're frequently stuck at places that masquerade as real experience, when, in fact, they are anything but. The problem with the convenience, to say nothing of the imposter, the problem with the cheaper, easier, more convenient, more luxurious, less grimy, shinier version is that it lets us out of doing the real work of citizenship in favor of the pretend work of tourism. Tourism, as anyone who's ever been on vacation knows, isn't actual work. It's merely the appearance of work wrapped up in frivolity and play. That's fine, of course. That's fine in Egypt or Argentina, in Edinburgh or Auckland. But when we're tourists at home, when we pretend to be strangers in our native land, then we stifle and smother our civic capacity, shirk and sidestep our civic duty. Because, make no bones about it, citizenship, our right, is real work. Citizenship, our responsibility, requires real work. Democratic citizenship in particular, citizenship that takes democratic articles of faith seriously, citizenship we should strive for, even if we don't always reach it, is impossible unless we have the experiences necessary to talk to one another, to understand one another despite our ancestral differences, to treat one another as equal partners in a mystery the bounds of which we cannot fathom and the purposes of which we cannot know. Which means that the civic project can only be reached from, can only be tackled at, can only be achieved through the center. For it's there at the center, not the faux center, the quasi-center, or the almost center, that we are capable of discovering something true about each other and something new about ourselves. For it's there at the center, without the veneer of something nicer and neater, but so much less real, that we are capable not only of grasping who we have been, but also imagining who we might want to become. For it's there at the center, not despite the fact that it's worn and gritty, but because of it, that we are capable of recognizing our shared sacrifice and realizing our common calling. I want us to be a civic nation, not a tourist one. I want our search for the center to be central to each of us. Saying that doesn't, in a twist that will no doubt seem both linguistically tortured and conceptually paradoxical, mean that I want any, much less all, of us to become centrists. The center isn't necessarily, isn't likely, isn't ideally even centrist. So searching for the center doesn't mean simply seeking centrism. It doesn't mean finding the middle ground. It doesn't mean splitting the difference. It doesn't mean bipartisanship or postpartisanship. It doesn't mean balance or moderation or conciliation. It doesn't, and I almost feel like I should whisper here because it's so unorthodox and controversial a claim these days. It doesn't mean compromise. Compromise is what leads us to the chandelier tree. Compromise is what draws us towards south of the border. Compromise is what pulls us into the Indian casino. Indeed, the very idea of compromise militates against the unvarnished authenticity vital to civic virtue, requiring us, as it does, to dilute our values, to distort our convictions, to dial back our integrity in order to find some happy medium with an adversary, whether a person with rival beliefs, or the ticking of time on the clock, or the lesser angels on our shoulders. The problem here isn't merely the unequivocal endorsement of one sense of center over another. It's the indefensible sacrifice of citizenship for tourism, and the unstated assumptions that it's better for us all to agree on what to see than disagree on what to do, that it's healthier for all of us to be on the same side of things that don't matter than on different sides of things that do. I find those assumptions both incredibly facile and needlessly fearful, not least since, in their eager embrace of a happy outside, they leave us nothing but hollow inside. The truth, of course, is that the path to the core doesn't run through the midpoint any more than the best views or the best restaurants sit along the highway. In politics, certainly, and in other aspects of life more generally, I suspect, you don't just assume the center, you find it. Which brings us back, after a bit of a detour, to where we began, to Dan Barry's Butte County pilgrimage. You slip through the barbed wire and follow a worn path toward the flag, past dandelions and wildflowers sprouting from the scrub, with nothing before you but sky, pasture, and a solitary flag, its reds and whites torn at the ends by winter's winds. And there, planted in the spring-softened ground, near pocks left by hooves and shoes, is a disc-shaped marker left in 1962 by the government's geodetic surveyors. In the center of the disc, it says, center. Hidden songbirds provide the only sound. Their chatter recalls the giggles of unseen munchkins. But then, in this remote, still place, there comes a strange sense of reassurance that in this time of uncertain war and near certain recession, of home foreclosures and gas at $4 a gallon, at least somewhere in this nation, a center holds. If we're thinking about the center as I've been urging us to, and as I think Barry really intends us to, and if we're living our lives as citizens of America rather than merely tourists in it, then the center holds not at a single point in South Dakota, but far more democratically at multiple and varied points all across this land. In those libraries and on those farms and at those bus stops where daily life is characterized by cooperation, commitment, and community, where there exists a working faith in the possibilities of human nature and the promise of we the people, where all embrace the fundamental and fundamentally risky animating principle that the ordinary is itself extraordinary. Hawthorne insisted that America, even in 1862, exactly a century and a half ago, was already too vast by far to be taken into one small human heart. Almost a decade later, Whitman lamented that he was continually haunted by the fear of conflicting and irreconcilable interiors and the lack of a common skeleton. Today's America is even far more vast than the one Hawthorne knew, with more conflicts of color and conscience than Whitman could have imagined. And yet, I want to suggest that the former's observation need not be consuming, and that the latter's fear need not be crippling. In fact, contradictory though the two sentiments may seem, I believe that their reconciliation is not only natural, but also, to the extent that our search for the center would be simultaneously impossible, if not for Hawthorne's vastness, and meaningless, if not for Whitman's conflicts, inevitable. As long as we treat the vastness as an opportunity to explore, rather than an obstacle to eradicate, as long as we sojourn in them, rather than step past them, then our interiors, plural and dissimilar though they may be, are far from doomed to divided destiny. In other words, as long as we take the search for the center to heart, we will never be left without one. The center. My job as a scholar may be to unearth it, but our job as citizens is to experience it, to make and remake, to be made and remade by it. So go forth, and whether you find your center amidst mesmerizing prairie monotony or in a scurrying subway corridor, don't forget to look for, don't forget to live for, the equivalent of the wind-tattered American flag behind it. It's off the beaten path. It might leave dirt on your pants or sweat on your brow, and it has neither gourmet coffee for you nor wireless internet for the kids. But it's there, and just once in your life as an American, if only for a minute, if only for a moment, I hope you are too. Thank you.